Good early afternoon here on the East Coast of the United States, and good whatever you are, wherever you are in this world. I am coming on today to talk about a few developments. And so, thank you for joining me on what would be generally my lunch hour. So, yeah, I wanted to review a few developments that have happened over the course of the last few days, analyze them, give you a framework from which to understand these developments. So while you are coming in, please do like the stream. Please do, of course, subscribe to the channel, hit the notifications bell, and consider supporting my work for as little as $5 a month or 70 per year on Substack at patreon.com/Danny Haifong. And of course, Substack is in the description as well. So yeah, continue to like the stream, subscribe to the channel, do what you can. Thank you, Kathy, for that super sticker. Hopefully, once I figure out all this monetization stuff, this money can go to good use. I just started the program, so I would appreciate if you could divert these funds to Patreon for a smaller monthly amount. That would be incredible as well. But no worries if you've already put in the super chat. So again, patreon.com/Danny Haifong is the best way to support this work. Please let me know how I sound. I did not do a formal audio check before this, but I had just used all the equipment yesterday, last night in a really interesting stream with Revolutionary Blackout Network. We talked about China and propaganda, what is real and what isn't, with Dr. Kareem, who is a frequent guest on their program. I was talking with Nick and CJ over at RBN. It was a great stream. So go check that out after you're done here if you have the time. But yeah, continue to like the stream. I don't want to get started. It seems like people are still filling up the room. So continue to share it, share this, subscribe to the channel, hit the notifications bell, all of the good stuff. And of course, subscribe to the Patreon to support the channel. All right. So a couple stories. Well, I'm not really a news story kind of person. I do more analysis, but I'm going to frame my analysis around a few developments. The first, we need to, of course, get to Ukraine. Vladimir Zelensky, president of Ukraine, has banned essentially all opposition parties, what he is calling and what Ukraine's government is calling the pro-Russia parties in Ukraine. They happen to be all left-wing parties for the most part, one of which has about a 10% of the parliamentary seats, for whatever that is worth in Ukraine. And this was an unprecedented move, and it came alongside a consolidation of Ukraine's state media. So I always like to think of what would happen if China decided to consolidate, let's say, CGTN, Global Times, and all its other organs into one. That's essentially what Ukraine did, and it's doing it on the justification that it needs to promote the correct kind of information about the war. And this is so ironic, too, because this ban of opposition parties comes as we've had a whole host of propaganda, a whole host of information that I've shown you right here on this channel, right? This heroism that has been imbued upon and endowed upon Vladimir Zelensky, all of these fake images. There has been no refutation of that. I don't know if you all saw the green screen debacle where Vladimir Zelensky was definitely standing in front of a green screen while he was supposedly standing in the streets of Ukraine, completely empty streets, and the lighting was all off, and it was mainly focused on him at the dead of night. So, and you could just see the backdrop, right? A typical green screen backdrop. So this is ironic that he is suppressing all these opposition parties on the basis that these so-called pro-Russia parties are the ones who are spreading the misinformation, when we have gotten just a misinformation bonanza from the Ukraine side and those who support Ukraine. So this is part and parcel, right? This is an escalation of a policy that somebody in the chat has already mentioned, is that this isn't new in Ukraine. This stems back to the 2014 coup, where directly afterwards, these far right forces, these puppets of the United States and NATO, began a policy of what they call decommunization. So the Euromaidan protesters were far right political ideologues, and they wanted at the base of their agenda to not only oppose and reject everything Russian, right, at the behest of NATO and the United States, but even deeper than that, right, when you have so many elements of fascism inside of Ukraine's political apparatus, that means you also have a deeply anti-communist government, which, as is the case and as has always been the case with fascism, the principal goal is to eradicate communism. It's to eradicate the communist alternative. Anyone who espouses the communist alternative, it is put into place. Fascism is generally put into place within a capitalist system when there is a need to suppress dissent by any means necessary, not just the subtle and covert means, not just the alienation, not just the general repression of day-to-day capitalist life and how that affects protests and labor unrest, etc., but to literally erase and eliminate the opposition because of the threat of socialism, the threat of communism. And so this decommunization has been happening in Ukraine since 2015, when it was announced as a policy under Petro Poroshenko, the former president of Ukraine. And then there was a Lenin statue taken down in Kiev. We're going to get into all of this. Okay, so continue to like the stream, continue to share the stream, continue to subscribe to the channel if you have not yet. Hit the notifications bell, and of course, subscribe to Patreon at patreon.com/DannyHaiFong to support this channel at whatever amount you are able. So, with that said, I'm just going to put up a small article on this topic. Okay, so it's from The Week, which is generally a conservative outlet. And it says, Zelensky nationalizes TV news and restricts opposition parties. So The Week is kind of a tabloid out in the UK. I believe it is. Let me confirm that, because The Week actually. Yep. So it was founded in the UK. It actually came after, ironically, well, not ironically. I need to stop using that word. I hate the word ironically. I'm going to purge that from my language. So let me just restate that this outlet actually attacked me and attacked uh, those in a group that I was once much more involved with, No Cold War, because we held, and it was mainly my efforts, we held the event on on opposing the Cold War and its relationship to racism. And we had David West, we had Jing Lee, we had a really good panel. We had Diane Abbott from the United Kingdom, an MP out there, Black MP, and because of her presence and her acceptance at this event, there was a backlash, an extreme backlash against us, and they named me as a genocide denier, and she was attacked, Diane Abbott, and it was really, really unfortunate. So The Week is a conservative outlet, but they here are saying that Zelensky nationalizes TV news and restricts opposition parties. On Saturday and Sunday, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky invoked his emergency powers under martial law. So there's martial law in Ukraine right now. And I guess some might say that that's justified given that there is a war. But as you know, with martial law, war is always a justification for it to suppress several opposition political parties and implement a unified information policy. In an address to the nation delivered Sunday, he announced a temporary ban on any activity by 11 political parties. So this isn't even just so this is any activity. This is just being active. This is just being affiliated in with a member of a party. So essentially you're not allowed to do anything if you're part of these 11 opposition parties, many of whom are socialist and left wing. So the ban includes the opposition Platform for Life party, which holds 43 seats in Ukraine's national parliament and is the largest opposition party. Opposition Platform for Life is a pro-Russia party, but on March 8th, the party leader Yuri Bokyo demanded that Russia, quote, stop aggression against Ukraine, end quote, according to the Ukrainian outlet LB. That same day, Viktor Medvedchuk, who was accused of treason against Ukraine in May and escaped from house arrest shortly after the invasion began, was removed from his post as the party's co-chair. And then they said that he's Vladimir Putin, his godfather to his daughter. Okay, who cares? Zelensky's information policy involves combining all national TV channels, the program content of which consists mainly of information and or information analytical programs, into a single information platform of strategic communication to be called United News. Reuters notes that until Saturday, privately owned Ukrainian media outlets continue to operate independently. Zelensky said the measure was necessary to combat Russian misinformation and tell the truth about the war. Okay. So Zelensky seems to be interested in telling the truth about the war, yet has essentially rode this wave of lies about his own legacy. And now he's instituting policies which are incredibly fascistic. Yet we're supposed to believe that he is interested in the truth about the war and he is for peace. And this is what these, former U.S. ambassador to Russia, Michael McFaul, and these clowns in the establishment continue to promote is this idea that Zelensky is some kind of hero. They're still trying to do this despite all indications that Zelensky is overseeing a fascist concentration of the political situation in Ukraine. That his rule, right, because it is threatened by this Russian intervention, by this Russian military operation. It is threatened, right? And I said it uh, in many instances. I've said it on here, right? I've said that the longer that this goes on, and the more and more it looks like Ukraine's government is going to have to cave, right, under the pressure of Russia's military operation, this only spells doom for Vladimir Zelensky's political rule and how he has attempted to exploit his mandate to demilitarize the situation in a manner that has only revealed him to be a puppet of the US and NATO. And what is so striking about this ban on opposition parties is that it's only against pro Russia parties. So he's not looking to consolidate the situation to tell the truth about the war on Ukraine, because if that were the case, he wouldn't just be targeting pro Russia parties, but he would be targeting also those elements within Ukraine society which have as their base ideology not just misinformation, but racism and dehumanization. And who are these parties? Oh, those are the Nazi parties, the Nazi organizations that reside in Ukraine, many of whom are embedded in Ukraine's military apparatus. So the Azov Regiment, for example, formerly the Azov Battalion, wasn't banned, right? They continue to serve in Ukraine's military and wage campaigns of terror like they are doing in Mariupol and other areas of Ukraine's eastern side. So, I mean, what does this tell us, right? What does it say about Ukraine's government and its leadership when it is willing to target generally and only left wing parties while giving cover and exploiting and collaborating with literal fascists? That tells us that this government is not just a puppet of the US and NATO, but it is a dangerous puppet of the United States and NATO. It is a puppet that is hostile, that is offensive, that has at its core an anti Russia on a race basis, an anti Russia campaign and strategy that it hopes to enact if and should it win this so called war. Now, that's not going to happen, right? Ukraine does not have the capacity to win any war unless the United States and NATO directly intervene and spark World War III. And even then, it would probably be just a disaster for humanity. It wouldn't work out in the way that Ukraine wants it. So, Ukraine and Vladimir Zelensky are pulling out all the cars to try to consolidate the rule of the coup regime as it gets more and more obvious that the only way for this to end is a peaceful resolution that takes the concerns of Russia into account and where both sides mutually agree upon uh, peace and measures that ultimately address some of the bigger issues that both Russia and Ukraine have with each other. And there were some reports over this same period this past weekend that, and it came from Turkey, because Turkey is helping broker these peace talks as well, that there could be a peace deal on the way that is close to an agreement. Now, it's hard to say how realistic that is because it seems like every time there's progress made in these nearly weekly talks, it seems that Vladimir Zelensky does something, the US does something that undermines the capacity and ability for peace. So we shall see. But nonetheless, Ukraine has just become a far more repressive place, a very unsafe place for anyone on the political left, and it is a really dangerous and unprecedented move to consolidate political power like this, even in so called war times, especially given the fact that this war could be ended in a much more simple manner. How? Well, Ukraine could just reject NATO membership and could also demilitarize and recognize the Eastern republics as independent states. And all of this would stop, right? And it could follow the Minsk Accords, enact a ceasefire in East Ukraine, pull back its troops and its so called paramilitaries and these fascist forces, and allow Eastern Ukraine to develop and have its self determination, something that, while controversial to some, actually is really the only possible solution here, given that it is not Ukraine, right? It's not the Ukraine government that is opposing the splitting of the country, right? Ukraine's military assault on Donetsk, Lugansk, on Donbass is literally a strategy to split the country. So the only solution then, if the people of Donbass want not to be a part of Ukraine anymore, if they want independence, and Ukraine is literally engaging in a civil war, which effectively splits the country, then the only solution is independence for these republics, a ceasefire, a peaceful resolution, one that has at its core the promise that Ukraine won't join NATO and that it will stop and begin to eliminate all of its uh, weapons systems and all of the lethal quote unquote military aid that it has received from the United States and NATO. And honestly, this is going to be a policy that I think Russia demands from countries all across its former Soviet republics and along its border as the US and NATO become more and more aggressive in their policy. So, this is really just act one of a larger problem that is going to see more and more conflict play out, more and more conflict develop. And we really do have the United States and its NATO alliance to blame. That's why we say abolish NATO, abolish NATO, abolish NATO. With that said, I want to show you how this has a basis in history, this consolidation of political power in Ukraine, right? This basis in the coup. So, right after the coup in Ukraine, even Amnesty International, which carried water for the US NATO invasion and war on Libya, on Syria, which honestly did not oppose Euromaidan and has not really oppose any of the US's wars, but even they reported on Ukraine. The Communist Party banned offers a decisive blow for freedom of speech in the country. So this was December 17, 2015, not too long after the Euromaidan coup. About I believe that happened late in 2014. So this is not too far from then, but decommunization started, right? And so they said banning the Communist Party in Ukraine is a flagrant violation of freedom of expression and association and should be immediately overturned, said Amnesty International. This district administrative court of Kiev upheld the request of the Ukrainian Minister of Justice to ban the Communist Party. It will no longer be able to officially operate or participate in local elections. So this was Act 1. This was step 1 of decommunization, which has escalated now in Ukraine. The banning of the Communist Party in Ukraine sets a very dangerous precedent. The move is propelling Ukraine backwards, not forwards, on its path of reform and greater respect for human rights, said John Dalhousen, Amnesty International's director of Europe and Central Asia. So, under 4 new laws adopted in May 2015, collectively known as decommunization laws, displaying communist or Nazi symbols can lead to criminal persecution and up to 10 years imprisonment. This is interesting. Or Nazi symbols. I would really love to check that out because it seems like there's a lot of Nazi symbols on the Ukraine military uniforms that we see being spread all across the corporate media. It seems like there's a lot of Nazi symbols, the Black Sun, the Azov symbol, its logo. It seems like there's a lot of Nazi symbols. So I don't think that's true. But anyway, nonetheless, decommunization laws with communism literally in the word, right? Literally fit in this word. Seems to me that Nazis are not really part of this, but that seems to be part of this propaganda. That's liberalism for you. The use of the term communist is explicitly prohibited in legislation. However, the CP of Ukraine refused to make changes to its name, logo, or charter. And good for them. So the Ukrainian authorities previously sought to ban the Communist Party last year, shortly after the end of the Euromaidan protests in early 2014. The party was accused of financing pro-Russian separatists, yada, 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 in Ukraine. So again, the same justification, right? That it's pro-Russian, that they're supporting the so-called separatists, which are the Eastern republics, which were under assault. So that's why they were calling for independence. But that's the claim here. And so the moves by the Ukrainian authorities to ban the Communist Party solely on account of its name and use use of Soviet era symbols violates the right of freedom of expression and association and sets a dangerous precedent in Ukrainian political life. In 2015, a spate of politically motivated killings remain unresolved, and journalists and media known for criticizing the current government have been harassed. So here you have it. Authorities published a list of people banned from entering the country, including dozens of journalists, mostly from Russia. So this is Ukraine, and this has been Ukraine for a long time, right? And so it's important to understand that context, understand that Ukraine has had these laws on the books for a while. The Communist Party has long been banned. And now this has extended to all left-wing groups who are considered even remotely, quote unquote, pro-Russian or honestly just critical of the current government. And so this is dangerous. Yeah, this is dangerous. So all those free speech folks, all those who seem to care about elections and political integrity and quote unquote democracy, it's so striking to see how most people, especially in the establishment, and particularly in the establishment, have not mentioned this at all. And yet they continue to promote this idea that Zelensky is a hero, even as he puts into place policies that they claim, let's say, Donald Trump was doing, or let's say Putin is doing, right? These are the things that they accuse those they don't like of doing. Yet when it comes to their allies and friends, they're perfectly okay with it, right? It's just like Saudi Arabia beheading 81 people in a day. Oh, it doesn't really deserve much attention, right? The US doesn't give them even a slap on the wrist. It just ignores it, moves on from it, and says, okay, we'll continue to do business. And that's exactly what's happening here. Ukraine is useful. Ukraine's a vassal state. Ukraine is a launching pad for this NATO drive to contain Russia. And so Ukraine can honestly do anything. It can do anything right now. It can beg for a no-fly zone even when the United States and NATO says, "Oh, hold on, we're not going to do that for you." But they can but he can do it. Zelensky can do it, and Ukraine's government can beg for it, and all these far-right forces, so-called protesting in the streets, can beg for a no-fly zone despite its ramifications without any criticism from the United States or NATO countries because Ukraine is useful, just like Israel is useful. Israel can genocide Palestinians, colonize Palestinians, but Israel is useful. It's a beachhead in the Middle East. It's a highly militarized settler colonial state, which does have honestly a similar agenda to the US in maintaining strategic imperialist dominance in the Arab and Muslim world out there, right? Out in that part of the world, Central Asia, Eurasia. So Israel is very important, right? And so Israel can do whatever it wants. And the United States will barely bat an eye. Actually, the United States will give about $3.8 billion per year to the IDF and to the Israeli Defense Forces to continue on its slaughter of Palestinians. Saudi Arabia, the same way. Billions upon billions of dollars in military weaponry, all going to the slaughter of the people of Yemen and the starvation of the people of Yemen and Saudi Arabia's dirty war on Yemen. One that is honestly not going to end because the people of Yemen fiercely resist, but there is no pressure outside of Yemen and outside, of course, the non-aligned countries. There is no pressure to stop it from those who are provoking the war, which, of course, is the United States and its allies, arming Saudi Arabia to the teeth, right? So there's all these flashpoints, and they all point to very convenient allies for the United States. And now Ukraine is being exposed as one of these. And now it is not just merely a coup government, it is one that is engaging in fascist policies and strategies to forward its agenda. And that, I must say, is incredibly dangerous. And it's something we must oppose. And it's something we must speak out against, no matter how hard it is, right? Because it is difficult right now. The anti Russia sentiment is at fever pitch in the United States and in the Western world. Most people view Russia as their enemy. And as I wrote on Substack, just that is not the case here, right? We need to continue to forward a clear understanding and analysis of the situation. And that means condemning Zelensky, condemning Ukraine's government for being an active participant, agent, and provocateur in this ongoing conflict. And so I want to share with you all what Russia's Communist Party, its second largest political force in the country, the second largest political force in the country, the Communist Party of the Russian Federation, which has an interesting history, right? It's a post-Soviet development institution formation, and it really is sort of a party of unity of a lot of different social democratic forces, communist forces, some post-Soviet, some post Communist Party of the Soviet Union leaders are in it. But it really has been, I think, a process in the making, and its political positions and its orientation to, let's see, even to the Russian government as it's currently constituted fluctuates, given that it is a party that's kind of in progress. And what's been very interesting to trace is how the Communist Party of the Russian Federation has behaved during this time. And again, I will say it again. In Russia, the Communist Party of the Russian Federation, the CPRF, is the second largest force in the country and won in the last election uh, even more of the parliamentary seats available. I think it represents now 15 to 17% of parliament. And so it has a lot of influence. And it was actually the party to suggest, right, ever since 2014, but recently, as the Russian government was deliberating on how to respond to the Ukraine crisis, the RCPF, the the CPRF was the one that proposed the intervention on behalf of Donetsk and Lugansk. And I will just say that I don't think that means that they were the ones who said, let's conduct a full scale military operation in Ukraine, but they were the ones who were saying we need to recognize these republics and their self-determination. And then we also need to fight on their side. And they were actually appealing to the entire Russian government and the Russian army to do this. So I find that very interesting nonetheless. But let me share with you their perspective. And while you are waiting, please do like this video. Please do share this video. Please do subscribe to the channel and make sure you hit the notifications bell. And while you're doing all of that, please do think about contributing to my Patreon at patreon.com/DannyHaiFong. It's the best way to support this channel. All right, here we go. So this is a statement of this Communist Party of the Russian Federation: hostilities in Ukraine. What is happening and why? So this is an even fuller analysis of statements that have been put out over the course of this military operation. So let me make this bigger because I can barely see this small writing so I can read it. So it says many comrades are asking about the character of hostilities in Ukraine. The assessment prevalent so far has been imposed by the Western media. However, by now, the nature of the Russian armed forces operation to liberate Ukraine from Nazism has become apparent. What prompted the start of the special operation? Beginning in December 2021, Russia had been receiving data on NATO's plans to deploy troops and missile bases in Ukraine. Simultaneously, an onslaught on the territory of Donbass was being prepared. About a week before the start of Russia's special operation, the plan was uncovered of an offensive that envisaged strikes by long-range artillery, multiple rocket launchers, aviation, to be followed by an invasion of Ukrainian troops and Nazi battalions. It was planned to cut off the DPR and LPR from the border with Russia, encircle and besiege Donetsk and Lugansk and other cities, and then carry out a sweeping, quote-unquote, security cleanup with annihilation of thousands of defenders of Donbass and their supporters. And now take into consideration, everyone, that when they say that this was going to happen, we might want to believe them given how Ukraine's military, even in this operation, has shelled, bombed the eastern part of Ukraine, Donbass, killing 23, even just recently, just a week ago, a little under a week ago, killing 23 people, children, families, ordinary people in Donetsk through a ballistic missile. And that just adds on to the total, which is now, I believe, upwards of 14,000. So when the Communist Party of the Russian Federation is saying this, we have a lot of reason to believe them. So the plan was developed jointly with NATO. The operation was scheduled to begin in early March of this year. Russia preempted Kiev and NATO, which enabled it to seize strategic initiative and effectively save hundreds of thousands of lives in the two republics. So imagine that. Imagine what would have happened, right? And this is not to say that this is 100%. This is to say that we might have reason to believe it given how Ukraine has treated the eastern part of its country for as on the Russian speaking part for as long as there has been a coup regime there. So it makes a lot of sense, right? Because Donbass has always resided upon, and then it doesn't move around. It's a particular part of Ukraine which borders Russia. So it makes sense in this offensive that Ukraine has been waging against Donbass that it would want to surround the strongholds of this region from Russia's border and cut it off from any potential for Russian help, which has been tepid up until this military operation. It has not been extensive, right? The Communist Party of the Russian Federation has been calling for more extensive support, and now here we are. But nonetheless, it hadn't been extensive up until this point, and it makes sense that Ukraine would want to do this from a strategic perspective if genocide and suppression of this part of your country is the goal. So the character of the combat actions so far, as the Communist Party of the Russian Federation claims, it says the aim of the Russian army is not to occupy territory or seize the country's economy and natural resources. It is a political war. Ukrainian society, under pressure from neo-Nazis, has been moving toward turning the country into a NATO base for attacking Russia. It is incumbent on our country to ensure its security. The combat actions are essentially aimed at forcing the Ukrainian leadership to enter into negotiations on demilitarization, denazification, and a neutral status for Ukraine, which is everything that we've been saying on this channel. The second goal is to protect the citizens of historically Russian Lugansk and Donetsk from blasts which since 2014 have refused to live under the control of the pro-Nazi group which staged a coup in February. It is basically a civil war between two parts, one of the same people. There's some grammar stuff here, translation stuff here. Not everyone knows that much of the fighting is conducted not by the Russian army, but by the forces of the People's Republics of Eastern Ukraine, DPR and LPR. The citizens of Donbass created their own army back in 2014. They are fighting for the freedom and independence of their small motherland, whose citizens were in danger or being deprived by the West of Ukraine's Nazis of the right to speak their native Russian language. They're also being deprived of water, food, and all sorts of other things, right? It is really, truly a devastating war. So, in reality, the Russian army is conducting military operations only in predominantly Russian speaking eastern and southern parts of Ukraine. These are Russian regions which were included in the territory of Ukraine in 1918 in order to strengthen its industrial base. They have never been part of Ukraine. The Russian army is coming to a Russian speaking region and not the regions of central and western Ukraine, which are ethnically different. As part of demilitarizing Ukraine, the Russian army is consistently destroying its military infrastructure. Strikes were delivered on airfields and landing strips to prevent the landing of U.S. NATO planes carrying arms, control points, air defense systems, radar stations. Stores of weapons, ammunition, and fuel were put out of action. But killing personnel and soldiers and officers of the Ukrainian armed forces is emphatically not the aim. Given the immense firepower and possession of the Russian army, it would be easy to simply wipe out all of Ukraine's forces and strong points along with the soldiers defending them. But this aim had never been set about because of the genetic kinship of our peoples. We are fraternal peoples. Brothers may quarrel and even fight. Such things happen over the course of history. But seeking to destroy each other is unacceptable for us. So this is an appeal, right? This is to demonstrate that this operation is not just the killing fields, right? That we're being told it is. It's not just bombing public infrastructure and shelling all cities without any kind of strategic orientation. No, the Communist Party of the Russian Federation is saying that there is a strategic orientation here, and it's very clear what the purpose is and who is being targeted and what is being targeted. So, the state of the Ukrainian army, it would be wrong to claim that Ukraine is weak and defenseless. During Soviet times, it had a huge group of Soviet troops, the most powerful in Europe. In 1991, the Soviet army split into Russian and Ukrainian armies. Ukraine kept gigantic quantities of military hardware, thousands of tanks, planes, artillery pieces, and huge ammunition dumps. Although the greater part of this weaponry was sold abroad to conflict zones, Ukraine has no need for arms supplies. Until February 2022, the Ukrainian army was considered to be the sixth strongest army in Europe after Spain, Germany, Italy, Great Britain, and France. Ukraine's land forces are practically equal in strength to Russia's. After the February 2014 government coup, the pro-Nazi authorities, even despite economic disarray, funneled money into beefing up its army. The aim was to protect Ukraine from not to protect Ukraine from external aggression, but to prepare the region for control over Lugansk and Donetsk People's Republics by military means. The most combat capable forces trained by NATO instructors were concentrated against Donbass. More than 120,000 army regulars and Nazi battalions were poised to attack Donbass, and powerful strong points were set up. So this is important, okay? This is basically saying that despite economic catastrophe, and this is true, right? There was an economic crisis right after the coup. There was full-scale privatization. There was selling off of assets. And despite all of this, there was a beefing up of the military. So that is an incredibly dystopic scenario that was set up in Ukraine after the coup, and it's never acknowledged, right? People who defend this government don't acknowledge the suffering and the pain that have been put upon the people since the coup in Ukraine. So it says Kiev was actively supported in preparing the invasion by the USA and other NATO countries. It received hundreds of millions of dollars to purchase arms, instructors, and they came to train its army, and Ukrainian military personnel studied at Western military schools. The West's aim was not merely to back Kiev in its effort to suppress Donbass. The main aim was to turn Ukraine into a springboard for NATO and its army into a force that would spearhead an attack on Russia. American servicemen are directly involved in hostilities in Ukraine. On March 17th, the forces of Donetsk People's Republic seized a Ukrainian army post in Donbass and discovered the bodies and documents of 3 U.S. Army officers. Of particular concern is the fact that the Ukrainian leadership has de facto committed itself to obtaining weapons of mass destruction. With U.S. help, 30 biological labs created on Ukrainian territory have been conducting research into lethal diseases and methods of spreading them. Kiev has been speaking about creating a nuclear weapon on the basis of Ukraine's nuclear power plants and its scientific and technical personnel. All this poses a threat to not only Russia, but the entire world. In entering cities, Russia is employing different tactics, and it tries its best, its army, to avoid civilian casualties and spare civilian infrastructure, in marked contrast to Americans who, within a few days, suppressed an uprising in Iraq's Fallujah by wiping out the city as the world community looked on. 50,000 people died. Such thing is unimaginable for the Russian army, right? And this is true. This is 100% true. 100%. All of the US's wars have targeted civilian infrastructure, public infrastructure. Think about this, guys. The United States used depleted uranium in Fallujah and has created one of the biggest public health crises in human history, right? Cancer rates are incredibly high in Fallujah, death rates are incredibly high, infant mortality is very high, maternal mortality is very high. Fallujah is still reeling from the US's genocidal campaign there that killed upwards of 50,000 and destroyed nearly every single building in that city. So it's very interesting to note that while there are refugees in Ukraine, and some have claimed that these refugees are like oligarchs, right? Because there are people on the political right who are numerous in Ukraine. And some people are claiming that this is the vast majority of refugees that are leaving Ukraine. Nonetheless, regardless of who they are, this isn't to justify the creation of refugees, but it is to say that the damage and scope of this operation could be a lot worse given how there is a model for this, and that model is the United States. That model is imperialism, right? NATO bombed schools, hospitals, the great man-made river that provided water to Libyan people and as well as people across North Africa. And that is a war crime. That is a deliberate war crime. But we're being told that Russia's operation is the worst since World War II. The worst, I guess they're saying it's the first attack on Europe since World War II, right? Because they want us to believe Ukraine is white in their eyes. But a lot of people are also saying that this is the worst war since then. This is the most dangerous war since then. And that is just not true at all. The casualties, I believe, are still under 1,000. And no one is doing any work on the Western side to communicate who those are. And of course, Russia is embattled and engaged in a war. So it's really difficult at this time for them to calculate, given that they are in Ukraine, which is a country hostile to them. So we don't have really an idea of who those are who are being killed in this war. And we're being told that it's just all purely civilians and innocents. But we don't know. So people need to really hold off and saying that they know, because they don't know, right? I'm not going to deny, though, that civilians are likely dying. We cannot deny that war has its costs. So the armed forces of Ukraine and the Nazi battalions have different tactics. Most of them come from Western Ukraine. They despise inhabitants of the eastern part of the country they do not consider to be fully Ukrainian. Accordingly, they do not consider it a crime to kill civilians and destroy civilian infrastructure in eastern Ukraine. They position their troops not in open spaces, but in residential neighborhoods of cities. They set up firing positions in residential blocks, schools, and nurseries. And this includes the Mariupol so-called maternity hospital. That's where they claimed firing position. They kicked out all the doctors, the staff, and the patients, and they used it as a firing position. And I've been saying this, they are using unconventional warfare. They are using methods of unconventional warfare. That is what Nazi guerrillas do. They do not follow the rules of quote unquote war among established states, and they are effectively using Ukraine as a big human shield. That is what Nazis do. That is uh, that is something that must be addressed, right? Because it is one of the most, I think, heinous war crimes that you could commit, which is to put people legitimately and purposefully in harm's way and literally do what the United States always accuses, let's say, Hamas of doing in Palestine, right? They claim that they're the ones who are using Palestinians as human shields. Meanwhile, it's the Palestinian people who are fighting back against an Israeli colonial aggressor, but nonetheless, a Zionist colonial aggressor. But nonetheless, this is the reality of the situation. So I'm not going to spend too much time on this because I got to move on to the other story because I'm only going to be on here till 1:30. But let me just summarize what's being said here. And while I'm doing that, please do like the stream, subscribe to the channel, share the video, and consider subscribing to my Patreon at patreon.com/DannyHaiFong. So in retreating, the Nazis used scorched earth tactics. They destroy civilian infrastructure, above all, blowing up bridges. The Nazis often stage hideous provocations, blowing up residential houses in order to accuse the Russian army. So this is what we're having. I mean, this was happening in Syria. This was happening in other places where infrastructure is destroyed. Things happen. We're told by the media it's the Russians, but we don't know, right? I do not trust anything that's coming out of sorry, Freudian slip, given the anti-Russia stuff. Anything coming out of Western media and social media, you see it every day on Twitter. Here's what's happening in Ukraine, and look how awful Russia is being. I can't trust any of it because we've been lied to way too many times, right? There's only so much you can take, and I don't trust any of it, and I'm not listening to any of it until I get confirmation. The Western media and politicians like to praise the staunch resistance of the Ukrainian army, but they omit an important detail. A large part of Ukraine's army is made up of neo-Nazi battalions notorious for their ferocity. The SS divisions were the hardest fighters in the Nazi army from the 41 to 45 war. The Nazi battalions in Ukraine today are the same SS units. They are indoctrinated, motivated, and they hate Russians. They've been prepared for war against Donbass and against Russia for 8 full years, being educated in the spirit of hatred for all things Russian. The world cannot believe that fascism has again sprung up in the very heart of Europe. Yet it is worth recalling that respectable Germans who have been given the world some of its greatest poets, philosophers, and musicians within 8 years between 33 and 41 turned into a nation which exterminated in gas chambers, burned alive, hanged, and shot tens of millions of Russians, Ukrainians, Belarusians, and Jews. The same thing is happening in Ukraine today. Incidentally, those who today are shouting loudest about the suffering of Ukraine's population, Poland and the Baltic countries, bear the heaviest responsibility for the Holocaust. Not only the Germans, but to a large extent, Polish, Lithuanian, Latvian, Estonians were exterminating their neighbors, Jews, and Belarusians. After the Second World War, some countries that had fought on Hitler's side conducted a policy of denazification. The decisions of Nuremberg's trial, which condemned fascism and its chieftains, and the experience of cooperation of the international community and the struggle against that evil remain relevant to this day. So essentially, what is being said here by the Communist Party of the Russian Federation is that there is a modern day struggle against fascism afoot. And that is a really difficult issue to present, a position to present, given that for the first time in history, the entire Western orbit, imperialist orbit, is in support of this rise of fascism, right? There is no breaking point here. There is no, oh no, the Nazis, Germany, they're getting too emboldened and their agenda threatens imperialist interests, let's say of the United States or of Western Europe. So we need to unite and fight them. That's not happening. The Western imperialists are united in supporting these particular forces in Ukraine. And that is very, very dangerous because it represents a worldwide phenomena, right? This is a worldwide trend. There is a growth in fascist ideology and fascism around the world, right? Just as there is this growth of a multipolar orientation and non alignment and anti imperialism, right? As that continues to develop, you will see this kind of fascism rear its head and grow because the United States and its NATO allies have an interest in backing it, have an interest in fortifying it and strengthening it, in trying to use it as a proxy arm of its new Cold War agenda. And the United States and NATO, just like anything that comes to imperialism, doesn't have full control, right? People think that imperialism is as simple as an imperialist power just pulling the strings wherever it goes, right? Pulling the strings in Ukraine, pulling the strings in Iraq, pulling the strings all across the world, and that means it has full spectrum dominance, that it actually has achieved this. But that is not how any social system works. That is not how political economy works. Actually, a lot of political economy, a lot about imperialism and capitalism, are about forces that are not in full control of those who rule over it, right? It is about the development of contradictions. It is about unleashing forces that ultimately shape and develop in ways that completely transform the very system that they are trying so desperately to reproduce and to maintain. That is why Karl Marx said capitalism produces its own gravediggers. And capitalism also produces, as revolutionaries across the world have said, it also produces the rudiments and the seeds for fascism. And fascism is a stage of capitalism when the capitalists have determined that the only way that they can save their system is by the most repressive, most extreme, most reactionary means possible, right? And that they have to consolidate these means and go on a direct assault and a direct war on any kind of dissent that challenges its rule, mainly targeted at communists, mainly targeted at those who promote the principles of communism, self determination, peace, right? Uh, the power and control of the means of production for working people. That is what is at stake here too, right? Because Ukraine is this fully privatized, completely vassalized country under a global capitalist finance, while at the same time politically it is being pushed further and further to the right into the arms, literal arms of these Nazi forces. And so it's important to note and to take away from this statement something I have been saying for a while now, and that is under a coup regime, right? Under a coup regime, under imperialism throughout history, the most important force in the state becomes the military. This is historically verified and documented from Brazil's dictatorship, which Dilma Rousseff, a heroic guerrilla force against the military dictatorship, the fascist dictatorship in Brazil during the 1960s. Greece as well had a military fascist dictatorship of the same kind. Spain had one of the same kind. But when we talk about coups, right? Coups like what happened in Brazil, like what happened in Greece, like what happened in Chile, 1973, September 11th, right? The military becomes immediately the most important force, right, under these coup arrangements. And why is that? I mean, Africa has a huge experience with this. African governments that have these long histories of Western backed colonial coups, they have extremely fortified and hardened bureaucratic militaries because it is those militaries that are needed to protect the oligarchs and the compradors, the collaborators from the masses of people, right? Thomas Sankara in Burkina Faso, right, suffered assassination at the hands of someone within his own military ranks because that is part of the project that he inherited, a country that was already under military rule. He attempted to move it in a revolutionary direction, and then the Western backed forces inside of his own government killed him. And so this is very important to note that in Ukraine, the same situation is afoot, that Ukraine's military is the most important political force at this moment. There's a reason why the United States isn't talking about how important elections are and democracy is in Ukraine. It's because all they care about is pumping Ukraine with arms so that this political situation continues in its benefit. So that is all I wanted to say on this because I want to move on to the China stories that I have, the unfortunate tragedies that I think need and deserve consideration. So as I transition, continue to like this stream. I've got about a half hour left. Continue to like the video, continue to share the video, continue to subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell so you know when I go live. And of course, please do support me on patreon.com/Danny Hai Fong. That is how you support this channel for whatever amount you are able to give. please do consider doing that. I greatly appreciate it. So let us move on to a few stories that have come out of China. So first, let's just get to the Boeing tragedy. I mean, it's so sad, right? I woke up yesterday and saw the news. China's timeline for me out here in the East Coast of the United States is it's like 12 hours difference. So, I woke up to the news that a Boeing 737 crashed in Guangxi province, and there were 133 people, 132 people on board, and that the way that it crashed, it's almost 100% likely that there are no survivors. There's speculation that this crash in Guangxi happened very strangely, right? Because these Boeing 737s have a really bad reputation. And here it seems like that the flight direction of the plane suddenly just dropped to a vertical level. So it was flying and then suddenly it crashed completely vertically into a mountain in Guangxi province. A Russian media actually put up a video that I will not play here because I do not like to watch it, even though it is far away and it looks almost a little unreal in some ways. Like it's not a plane, but it literally looks like a stick falling completely horizontally onto the ground from, that height. So it's really bad. But here you have CGTN say that survivors in China plane crash very unlikely, says a flight expert. So many experts are asking why Boeing 737 is still being used in China despite a national ban. Please note that the ban is on Boeing 737 MAX, not the Boeing 737-800 involved in the crash on Monday. And a little bit of context for this. So it was a few years ago, I believe, 2018, 2019, where Boeing planes of that kind that they said, right? These 737-800s, because of their history in Ethiopia and other places, there were a lot of crash with many fatalities, and they were banned. China was one of the first countries to ban them. And so this particular Boeing 737 MAX was supposed to be an updated model that was safer, that had taken more precautions and had followed China's regulations. This is the first crash actually in China in 12 years, right? So China has extremely stringent flight safety measures and generally is able to keep people safe. I flew on 2 planes when I was in China locally. They were very smooth rides, no turbulence whatsoever, despite the climate. I mean, they really do take take people's lives into consideration. And so a Chinese flight expert has said it's very unlikely there are any survivors in the plane crash on Monday, as rescuers are still putting all efforts into searching. The search and rescue team have found more plane debris and some personnel belongings scattered near the site in southern China, where a China Eastern Airlines Boeing 737-800 crashed with 132 people on board. The medics found some burned identification cards, bank cards, and wallets on the way to the crash site near Molang Village, Tangshan County, Wozhou City, Guangxi, Zhuang Autonomous Region. All the personal belongings were collected as evidence. The aircraft was diving straight to the ground at a very high speed, which means there must have been a really terrible impact, Wang Yanan, chief editor of Aerospace Knowledge magazine, told CGTN. Wang said he's concerned that the plane's black box, which many revealed data that could give insights into the crash, could have been damaged by the fire caused by the crash. If the data in the box is safe and complete, we could know what happened to the aircraft and in what condition it was flown. It may tell us what exactly caused the tragedy, but it seems like that's unlikely. Intended crash also unlikely. Wang said that it's not likely that the pilot of Boeing 737-800 intentionally crashed the plane. The explanation that the pilot lost control of the plane and couldn't avert the tragedy fits better with the plane's last behavior, he said. Wang said under normal circumstances, if a plane's engine breaks, the aircraft should be able to glide for a very long distance, leaving an extended window for the pilot to deal with the emergency. The Beijing News quoted an unnamed expert saying the plane's fast fall before the crash was abnormal, but there's no evidence to pointing to a mid-air disintegration. So the rescue is all-out rescue. The rescue operation is underway with the help of hundreds of rescuers, including Chinese military and paramilitary forces, medics, and even local villagers. Relief supplies have been delivered to the crash site for rescue operation. As the crash site is located in a mountainous area and there's only one route to the site, it's more challenging for the rescue team or larger vehicles to get through. Therefore, motorbikes have become the main mode of transportation to deliver supplies. A working group of the Civil Aviation Administration of China has also been deployed at the crash site. So they're just talking about what they're doing. Communication equipment, supplies, drones were delivered to the site to help the rescue operation. And Chinese Premier Liu He also said of the political, also a member of the political bureau of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of China and State Councilor Wang Yang on Monday led officials to guide rescue work at the crash site. The U.S. National Transportation Safety Board Monday said it appointed a senior air safety investigator as the U.S. accredited representative for the crash investigation. Boeing Chief Executive Dave Calhoun, Dave Calhoun, I don't know if you remember him from the Biden administration, said, or from the 2020 Biden election campaign, said he didn't care whether Biden or Trump won, that the Boeing's military contracts and Boeing's business would boom nonetheless. This is the problem with these monopolies having such a hold over so many key public utilities like air travel. So they're investigating. The plane was en route to Guangzhou, capital of South China's Guangdong province, from Kunming, capital of southwestern province of Yunnan. It has been over 4,000 days for China's civil aviation safety record before the crash, based on the latest data. So that's what's happening with that development. They're trying to find a way to find anyone who may be alive, but it's quite unlikely. And it's just so sad, right? It's so sad, and I think it's just important to note that these Boeing planes, they must be investigated. They will be, right? On Chinese social media, on Weibo, boycott Boeing was trending, and we can only expect that China will not allow this to go unpunished. And so we'll see how developments play out and how the investigation plays out. But it's a very sad development, but one that's significant because anytime anything happens to China that may not be positive, there are usually people who are trying to exploit it. We had this Chris Fenton clown, right? This clown who wrote some book on, he's one of these China watchers that doesn't even have a decent following, right? He claimed that the Communist Party of China could have intentionally done this and then deleted the tweet because he was immediately ratioed for such a ridiculous claim. But this is how these people think. This is how just hostile and racist the China watcher community is. They are pearl clutching European Anglo-Saxon imperialists who want to see China fall and who want to see the Chinese people return to a century of humiliation like that which existed during the period of the Opium Wars all the way into the 1940s. So with that said, I also want to talk about China's now battle with the Omicron virus because, as you all know, there has been a lot of negative coverage of China's pandemic containment measures, its dynamic zero COVID policy. And I'm sharing CGTN articles because I'm sick of mainstream press. I don't want to read their jabs and attacks on China, which serve no purpose but to fuel a new Cold War. So I'm using CGTN here because I find that their reporting tends to be a lot more objective, especially around matters of China. Tends not to politicize. Sorry about that. Tends not to politicize issues. So with that said, China now is having outbreaks. China now is having, daily cases of up to 1,000 per day, and there have been a few deaths. And now the Western media, of course, is hyping all of this to say that this means that China's zero COVID policy no longer works and that all of the so-called experts are right, that China should just open up everything and stop fighting the virus because there's absolutely nothing you can do. And that actually, by keeping natural immunity from Chinese people, that China's government is somehow endangering the Chinese people even more. Nothing could be further from the truth, but here we go, right? This is the story. 95% of cases are mild or asymptomatic. seems to kind of jive with the experience of a country that is highly vaccinated and also has put into place pretty stringent COVID-19 measures. So, all of this talk about, oh, if you just don't open it up and let it rip, then this virus is even more deadly, doesn't have any basis in science. That's all politics. That's all just big business wanting you to go back to work, even amid this large inflation crisis. So, here we go. So, more than 95% of infections reported in China's latest COVID-19 rebound are mild or asymptomatic, a health official said on Saturday. The Omicron variant of the coronavirus is currently the dominant strain in China, Zhao Yuhe, head of the Bureau of Medical Administration of the National Health Commission, said at a press conference in Beijing. As of Friday, there were 29,127 hospitalized cases on the Chinese mainland, but less than 1.1% of the patients were under severe or critical condition, she said. The latest COVID-19 wave is still developing, and many provinces see Omicron infections occurring in multiple areas simultaneously. Li Zhonglong, deputy head of the Bureau of Disease of Prevention and Control of the NHC. From March 1st to March 18th, the Chinese mainland reported 29,000 cases in 28 provinces, with more than 10,000 cases in northeastern Jilin province, he said. Mi Feng, spokesperson of the NHC, cautioned against letting the guard down in the face of a still raging pandemic and called for earlier, faster, and stricter implementation of COVID-19 prevention and control measures. China will stick to its dynamic zero COVID strategy to contain the outbreak and strive to achieve the best virus containment results at minimal costs, according to officials. So China had 2 deaths, mainly caused by underlying diseases. Jilin province, the most heavily hit area in the current wave, reported 2 COVID-19 related deaths on Saturday, the first new deaths on the Chinese mainland in more than a year. Most of them were senior people aged over 60 with severe underlying diseases, and one of them was not vaccinated, Zhao said, adding that their underlying diseases were the direct causes of their death, as they were mild COVID-19 cases. The latest deaths brought the total number of China's COVID-19 fatalities to 4,638 since the pandemic began. Think about that. 4,638. China has accumulated rich experience in medical treatment of COVID-19 patients and has achieved the best results in the world, Zhao said. Nearly 1.24 billion people are fully vaccinated. So out of the population, 1.24 billion out of the 1.4 billion population in China has been fully vaccinated against COVID-19, said Mi. More than 3.2 billion doses of COVID-19 vaccines have been administered on the Chinese mainland by Friday, he said. Current research has shown that the Omicron variant cannot completely evade existing vaccines, said Zhang Zhongwei, the NHC official heading China's COVID-19 vaccine development team. Domestic and overseas research have shown that full courses of vaccination can significantly reduce the risk of developing pneumonia and severe illness after Omicron infections. Booster doses and sequential immunization, which means mixing different types of vaccines to boost people's immune system, can further lower the risk of breakthrough infections of Omicron, he added. So essentially, China is going to stick to the zero COVID dynamic, zero COVID strategy. And this, of course, is much to the chagrin of the imperialists who want to see China follow the model of the United States and the West, not because they want to see China get back to business, because China's economy has been mostly open. I mean, there are, of course, some restrictions, but China's economy has been the most open economy in the world, right? Since COVID-19 has emerged. Since April 2020, most of China has been working. They've been going in person where it's necessary. And life has kind of been going on as it usually would, of course, with some measures of restrictions and as well as with, especially where cases arise, and especially vaccinations have been a big part of their containment strategy of late. But the Western media, of course, will demonize this. They will say that China is going too far. And this has been a convenient and just a constant narrative on the part of the imperialists since the beginning. It cost a lot of people's lives in the United States during the March period, where the United States was kind of sitting on this virus, allowing it to spread undetected, right? The United States wasn't even trying to get testing kits, regardless of whatever you think, right? whether these tests are accurate, all of this. This is a new pandemic. No one really knew how to respond, and people were working as fast as they could to try to figure that out, to try to figure out how to do testing kits, to try to figure this out. And China was taking this all very seriously and moving very fast. And the United States spent basically the month of February demonizing China, degrading China while doing nothing on its own to preempt the virus coming to the United States. And you saw what happened. Now we're going to reach 1 million cases very soon, probably before the middle part of this year. While China, I mean, million deaths, right? I said 1 million cases. There have been far more than 1 million cases of COVID-19 in the United States, but 1 million deaths are approaching, likely before the middle part of 2022, while China, 4,638, despite having 4 times the population, right? Well, more, I think, than 4 times the population of the United States, 1.4 billion compared to 300 or so million in the United States. And yet, China has been able to keep death rates really low. And we're likely to see the same thing because, as the CGTN article said, those most at risk of death from COVID-19 are those who are already sick, right? And they said COVID related deaths because there's all this politics about whether it's from COVID, with COVID, all of this stuff. And so the way to avoid that is COVID related. That if you caught COVID and your underlying conditions were exacerbated, then you not only died of your underlying condition, but you also died of COVID because COVID was the spark that led to your premature death. You might have lived a lot longer with lung disease or whatever it is, diabetes, whatever underlying condition caused you to be more at risk and you're immunocompromised. That was part of it, as well as COVID-19. So that's why they use the term COVID related. And that's what I like about CGTN and Chinese media as a whole around COVID is you don't get the politics. You don't get the, well, what is the debate about the narrative, right? You get, what are we going to do to protect people like those 2 older folks who died of COVID-19 when they shouldn't have, right? That's how China has treated this. And so I'm sure we will see cases go down eventually, but of course Omicron is a super spreader. It is very contagious. And so China is likely to be in for a battle, right? Probably the biggest battle with the virus since Wuhan. But given the trajectory already, how the cases are mostly mild and how zero COVID has been so effective, it's likely that it won't lead to mass casualties, but we will likely see a lot of cases nonetheless. But again, it's just a reminder that China's COVID-19 containment policies are effective and they fit into a larger model of public health that I think is both admirable and much needed in the United States and the West. A model that takes into account the lives of everyone, that protects the lives of everyone, that has at its core the provision of necessary healthcare services for everyone, and that says that cost is not prohibitive, that you should not have your health care restricted or completely stripped away from you just because you don't have money, right? There's a lot of principles here that we could learn from. Also, China's COVID-19 containment policy has taken a lot of community organizing, a lot of bringing together of all sections of the society in order to ensure people's safety. So that includes the neighborhood committees, the large numbers of volunteers in each city, village, province, right? It includes this massive mobilization that is still ongoing, right? And it's going to continue now that Omicron is a problem in China. And I think that's a beautiful thing, as terrible, right? This is a tragedy. COVID-19 has been one of the biggest tragedies that we have faced as a species in the modern era, outside of course, the endless wars and the needless deaths to state repression and exploitation. This pandemic is right there in all of those foundational roots, right? The exploitation and the repression inherent in the US's system of development, imperialism, have only made things a whole lot worse. And so we can learn a lot from China, whose governance model is not based on this super exploitation, this endless militarism. It's not based on that. We can learn a lot from what it means when your system has a different orientation, when it has humanity, when it has human beings, their lives, their livelihoods at the core. That's something we can learn from. It certainly is. And so that's why I wanted to talk about this, because as tragic as it is, right, the 2 deaths that have occurred, the United States is still seeing over 1,000 deaths per day due to COVID-related issues, and that's just preposterous and ridiculous. The so-called richest country in the world, with the so-called most modern healthcare system in the world, has people dying of a totally preventable slash also a virus that can that where death can be prevented. You have people dying in mass numbers still in 2022, right? This virus came about, or was at least it was discovered at the end of 2020, and of course, really spread in 2021. But we are in I mean, no, it was 2020. What am I saying? See, I even have my own timeline off. No, the end of 2019, it was discovered. In 2020, that's where the rapid spread occurred. And then it just kept going and going and going in the places that seemed not to care, right? And only cared about profits rather than people. So, geez, that just takes me back, right? When I think we've been doing this for now, we're into the 3rd year, 2020, 2021. Yeah, we're into the 3rd year of this nightmare. And the United States, the Western media, the imperialists, they still want to talk about China's COVID-19 policy as being a poor one, as being one that's not smart, and all of this nonsense, right? All this jingoism, being repressive and authoritarian and all this nonsense. Meanwhile, you still have more than 1,000 people dying per day. Sometimes I think that this rotten imperial society is not satisfied until all the poor, all the vulnerable, all the oppressed and exploited are just eradicated, right? That there is this kind of like final solution. It's a very fascistic, where the system has become so monopolized, such a drain on human progress, such a ball and chain on its own mode of production, that mass death is just not something that matters as much anymore, right? Because things like plagues, things like virus, during the early stages of capitalism, capital wanted to figure out how to prevent some of that, because labor was seen as a crucial aspect of how to accumulate profit. Now you have this suicidal neoliberal financial capitalist class that really only sees labor as something to either super exploit or to literally eliminate from existence, right? And that is a stage of capital which is moribund, and in which must be overthrown and destroyed. Like that is our task. That's what COVID-19 has taught me, is that this system is moribund and it needs to die. And it needs to die only by our hands, because as we see, it's dying right now on its own, and it's not enough, right? People are still kept in the state of despair, still propagandized to the point where they're willing to scapegoat other countries where racism and white supremacy and this Anglo-Saxon kind of jingoism and chauvinism continues to affect people all across the political spectrum, to the point where we can't even address very what seems to be basic antagonisms, like police homicide of Black people, right? State repression, mass incarceration, things that should be to the naked eye clear injustices, clear at war crimes, domestic war crimes, clear foundations for the rise of a new kind of fascism, right? A more friendly looking fascism cannot be addressed because, right, the propaganda has been that effective, and people's lives are actually that hard right now. When I think about the conditions of working people right now, of oppressed people, life is very challenging, and it's challenging in new and modern ways that the era of endless austerity and neoliberalism and this kind of rapacious, unfettered laissez-faire capitalism in its most modernized stage has thrown people for completely off kilter, right? The high rates of mental illness, of suicide, the deaths of despair. I mean, we're talking about alienation to a degree that cannot be compared even to the transitionary phases, right, of development. Because even though, of course, right, throwing the peasants off their land, forcing them to work in Europe was certainly a massively traumatic experience that led to mass death, disease, and of course, super exploitation. And even thinking about colonialism, right? Yeah, of course, those were events that were incredibly violent and caused mass suffering. But now you have the foundations of all of those things and their continuation piled on top of a more modernized, a more fast paced, a more so called advanced and high tech stage of development, which creates just these new problems that pile on to the old. And the old, right? This is where Marxism becomes so important. The old is not old in the sense that it's done, it's happening, right? Colonialism is not done, it's continued, right? The rights of indigenous people, the conditions of indigenous people are deplorable and disgusting and a reflection of that. Palestinians, people across the world, Mexico, Mexicans, right, right, living right here within the colonial borders. I mean, the conditions are still there, but it's ongoing and it has changed. It has morphed into this modern empire, which is now crumbling, right? It's now crumbling. It is eroding. It is breaking, right? It has reached a breaking point and it is conducting an ideological assault, a political assault, a police state assault, right? An outright war on everyone in any movement, in any nation that says, no, we can do something different. We can chart a different path. So Russia's under fire. China is under incredible fire. Nations around the world who are trying to do their best to be independent under fire. And then of course our movements are under fire, and a lot of them have been scorched out. A lot of them have succumbed to the attacks and the assault. And so here we are in another day of this COVID-19 ridden, crisis ridden wasteland, and we have to maintain our positivity and our optimism. And I think that some of the things that we see in the coverage that I provide here, I hope can provide some of that. When you do have the Communist Party of the Russian Federation being extremely courageous, this is extremely courageous to do, to come out and say, here is what is happening in Donbass. Here is what the roots of this military operation are. And we take a firm position that there does need to be something done about the Ukraine situation, that it cannot stand as it is. The same goes for China with both the Boeing incident and COVID-19 tragedies, yes, but China is very proactive in trying to remedy the situation in the best interest of the people. And we need to gain not only inspiration from those acts of courage, but also from our own, right? More and more people are looking and seeking an alternative. There is more interest in socialism. Now there is just a need to elevate and really amplify those voices, those movements, and those people who are most affected by this. We need to talk about Julian Assange along with Mumia Abu-Jamal and Sundiata Kohli. We need to begin to broaden the analysis, to bring it all together, and to get back to the business of Marxism, to get back to the business of real socialism, not socialism light, not socialism ish, not Bernie Sanders politics, not okay, we need to just mess with third parties and have decent positions on things. I think the time for all of that has ended. I think now it's time to come to the conclusion that, yeah, we need to come together on a political basis where we have socialism at the heart and where we talk about this word revolution in a way that isn't stigmatized and that isn't seen as just some kind of pipe dream of the past, but as something that is needed right now, right? A complete social and political transformation of the rotten system that is still dominating the planet and still causing such suffering around the world. So, with that said, I think I'm going to end the stream, but please do like the video. Please do share the video. Please do continue to hit that notifications bell. And I'm going to put it out there. Uh, please do support this channel. Please do support all my work. It's not just this channel, it's all of my work at patreon.com/Danny Haifong. I am looking to continue to expand. I'm going to cap my Patreon very soon. I'm getting close, but I still need about, before I do that, I still need about $180 a month, which will take a while. And I'm not like, hey, come give it to me now. But I am saying that once I get that, I'm capping it and saying, no, 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 I'm not taking any more because I just want to keep it at a certain level. I'm not here to just massively accumulate. I'm just here to make what I need to get so I can, one, live under these extremely expensive times in the rotten imperialist core, and then also, invest in some things for the media work, and also begin to pursue ideas that involve some extra costs, so including traveling. So that's why I'm going to cap it, but please do uh, consider supporting the channel in that way, supporting all of my work, my weekly columns. I'll have a new one on Black Agenda Report tomorrow, an original one there. And I was trying to get something for Thursday on here, but I have not heard back from the potential guest. So I got to get back on that. But possibly I'll be back on Thursday. We'll see. And then there might be a break. There's going to be a little bit of transition period. My wife is actually changing jobs. So we're going to have some time off and take a little vacation. It's very rare to get this time off at this time. So we'll see what happens from here with the channel. Working on transitioning this channel to make sure that it's protected in a platform that will not just delete me. So that's in the works. That will be coming very soon. And yeah, I'm trying to read more, trying to study more. We all need to get back into the habit of that. I feel like I don't know if you feel what I feel, but it's something that can be easily dropped when there's so much work to do. But I've gotten back into it. I'm reading Albert Szymanski's "Is the Red Flag Flying?" about the Soviet Union's political economy. Very interesting book. I would recommend it. I got a little more than a few others that I need to get back into. America's Prisoner by Peter Eisner, who I was trying to have on the show, but our paths just didn't cross, and so I'm just trying to finish that book as well. There's a lot of that's lots about Panama, so a good book. So yeah, so there's that. And I'm trying to think if there's anything. I'm doing this weekly podcast on Sundays on Callin app, so download that. Trying to think if there's any other announcements that I have before I let you all go. I don't think so. Right, I've been kind of going pretty hard. I've been trying to post daily on the channel, so that takes up some time. Um, yeah, I don't think I have any other announcements. So salute to all of you. And Big Teal, I see you got like a reading list. I would love to make my own reading list again, but no, I mean I could, of course, if you hit me up. I don't know if you're on. I don't think you're I don't know if you're subscribed to my Patreon, but if you're not, hit me up on social media or something. I'm always happy to um and if for some reason I'm not following you, just hit me, tag me or something. I'm always down to provide reading materials and help in any way. If you have questions, I try to answer them. I try to be respondent, but things are tough. This is a tough time. I mean, um, yeah, these are tough times. So I go through my own ups and downs, and so I am doing the best that I can. I hope you all are doing the best you can to survive these times while also doing your part as best you can to be an effective part of this movement. It's tough, but I salute to all of you. Thanks for following my work. Thanks for everything, all the support. So before you leave, of course, like the video, subscribe to the channel, share the video, hit the notifications bell, and yeah, one last call. Support my work at patreon.com/Danny Haifong, and there will be plenty to come. All right. Peace out, everyone. Take care.